Guten Tag und Hallo. Ich bin Billy Badger und wir haben jetzt bald die Hälfte von unserem Textbuch Bausteine 1 hinter uns. Das ist jetzt Kapitel 6. Herzlich willkommen. Our theme for this week is eating, essen. And this means that we've been thinking about vocab for food and drink items, but it also means that we've needed to start to consider the differences between subjects and objects and the implications that this will have for the way that we communicate in German. But of course, at the same time, it also opens up opportunities for us to talk about our family, things that we have, things that we need, we like, we eat, and we drink, and so on. I want us to think about a particularly prominent feature of the German language. Now, it's one that we don't have to think about too much in English. These are cases. Now, the term is simply a word that we use to describe the role of a noun or a pronoun in a sentence. And in German, nouns or pronouns fall into one of four main categories. Now, other languages have fewer cases. English, for example, has only 3, but Latin has somewhere around 6. So German, in terms of the number of cases at least, falls somewhere in the middle. Let's have a look at an example so we can see what it is that we're talking about. Let's take something that's maybe relevant to my current situation. The man damages his wife's car. And here I think you can see that we've got 3 nouns, a man, his wife, and a car. We also know, of course, what has been going on, damage. We know who caused the damage, the anonymous man. This is our subject. We know what has been damaged. It's not the wife. It might very soon be the man, but for now it's the car. This is our object. In fact, it's the direct object, but for now we'll be happy to call that just simply our object. We also have a wife, the person to whom the car belongs. This is the possessive in English, and it's very similar in German. But this week we're only interested in subjects and objects. In grammatical terms, we refer to these cases as the nominative and the accusative. So let's look at each of those in turn. First of all, subject. The subject is, of course, fairly easy for us to identify because that subject is going to be tucked in right next to the verb on one side or the other. And so while the verb shows us what's going on, the subject tells us who's carrying out the action described by the verb. We know this already, of course. Let's take, for example, a sentence that we're probably already quite familiar with. Der Mann studiert in Berlin. We could, of course, use the pronoun instead and say er studiert in Berlin. Either way, the man, er, he, is the person who is doing the studying. So this is our subject. So what about an object? Of course, not all sentences need to have an object. In our original sentence, der Mann studiert in Berlin, we don't have an object. It's very tempting sometimes just to assume that the other noun in a sentence is going to be our object, but that's not the case. Here we have the sentence, der Mann studiert in Berlin. Berlin tells us where the man is studying, but it doesn't tell us what the man is studying. So if we have, for example, the sentence, der Mann studiert BWL in Berlin, then now we know what the man is studying, business studies, and this becomes the object of our sentence. And with lots of verbs, it makes sense for us to have an object in the sentence. Let's take, for example, some verbs that we are already familiar with. Kaufen, for example, the verb to buy. Die Frau kauft Obst und Gemüse. Here we know what's happening. This is what the verb tells us. Kaufen, to buy. We know who's doing the buying. Die Frau, the woman. And we also know what is being bought. Obst und Gemüse, fruit and vegetables. So the fruit and vegetables in this sentence are our objects. Let's take another verb that we're very familiar with already. Trinken, to drink. So we have the sentence, morgens trinkt die Frau ein Glas Wasser. We know what's going on. This is what the verb tells us, drinking. We know who's doing the drinking, die Frau. And so what she's drinking will be our object, ein Glas Wasser, a glass of water. Other sentences might involve things that you need, or things that you have, or even people, family members and friends that you have. So for example, I might use the verb brauchen, the verb to need, and say, ich brauche ein Bier. I can talk about things that I have. So for example, ich habe ein Buch. I can talk about family members and say, ich habe eine Schwester. Ich habe eine Mutter. Ich habe ein Kind. So maybe at this stage you might be thinking to yourself, why the big deal? Now it's important to recognize the difference between them. Not only do they help us to work out what's going on in more complicated sentences, but in German, like in English, we sometimes use different pronouns for subjects and objects. And in German, we also use one new article for the object case. So let's turn first of all to articles. And one of the first things that we learned about nouns is that we use them with one of three articles, and that these articles, particularly the definite article, gives us some information about the gender of the noun. The indefinite article does to a limited extent. But these are the subject articles, and for the most part they're going to be exactly the same when we use articles with objects, but there is one important difference. And we can see this important difference when we start to talk, for example, about our families. But it's when we come to masculine objects that we really notice the difference. So for example, talking about a brother, ich habe einen Bruder, you'll notice that we now use einen instead of ein. It's only when we have a masculine object that we need to be careful to use this new article, einen. Ich habe einen Bruder, ich habe einen Onkel, ich habe einen Vater. And we notice that when we use the indefinite article, that we can still determine the gender of the object. If it's feminine, we'll be saying eine. If it's neuter, ein. And if it's masculine, einen. And the same thing happens, of course, when we use the definite article. Let's think about things that I buy. Ich kaufe die Lampe. Feminine, still die. Ich kaufe das Buch. Neuter, so that's still the same as our subject articles. But it's when we talk about buying masculine things that we need to use the new article. Ich kaufe den Computer. And you'll notice here that both den, the definite article for the object case, and einen, the indefinite article for the object case, that both of them have the same ending, the same en ending. So in summary, we only need this new article, den or einen, when we're using masculine objects. So when we're talking about things that we have, things that we need, things that we like, and so on. Well, we also said in the beginning that some of our pronouns are going to be different when we're talking in the object case. Now, if you think about it, you already know that the pronouns we use for subjects are going to be slightly different than the pronouns that we use for objects. We say, for example, he knows me and not he knows I. We say, I know him and not I know he. And of course we have the same thing in German. If we use again the verb to know, which in German is kennen, we will be saying kennt mich and not kennt ich, for he knows me. Well, similarly, we'll have ich kenne ihn and not ich kenne for I know him rather than I know he. And like in English too, not all object pronouns are going to be different in the subject case when compared to the object case. So have a look at the following table and make sure you learn our new words for me, you, and him. And of course, we'll use these new pronouns for things as well as for people. So for example, if I'm talking about a computer, I will say, der Computer ist gut, ich kaufe ihn. The computer is good, I'll buy it. So that was a brief summary of subjects and objects, our main grammatical structure for this week. As always, don't forget to look back through the practice exercises, check your answers, and if you have any questions, do let us know. That was it then for Chapter 5. Das war's für Kapitel 5. Ich sage Dankeschön, auf Wiedersehen und Tschüss.